Hello and welcome to the opening concert of the Apollo Chamber Players 2020-2021 virtual season. I'm St. John Flynn, and it's a pleasure to be able to introduce our guests today. We have Matt Dietrich and Annabelle Ramirez and Matthew Dudzik from the Apollo Chamber Players, along with Tracy Silverman, who is our guest electric violinist today, and composer Kimo Williams. Thank you all very much for joining us. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Matt, as the Apollo Artistic Director, I'll ask you to give us a sense of this new season titled Pathways of Renewal. What's this all about?
Well, with everything going on in the year that is 2020, we wanted to craft a season of programs which are thoughtful, timely, and uplifting most of all. To help us emerge from this year stronger and in a more meaningful way through music and art. So we're doing our Transcendent Beethoven concert to open our season. Next month we have a Brazilian Christmas concert with multi-instrumentalist Jovino Santos Neto. In February we're celebrating the centennial celebration of the Harris County Public Library System with a few composers of color to tie in with Black History Month. And then in April, we'll end our digital season with a program titled Music of Exile, with a new work for string quartet and bassoon by Rice University faculty composer Richard Lavenda. We're all about bringing, past composers into the 21st century, connecting them with topical events, and presenting them in a way that can connect with people meaningfully. So I think all of these programs will really tie into what's going on in society today, and help kind of change the narrative for the better.
Well, this is the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. He was born in 1770. And right at the top of the program, we heard Tracy Silverman. And that was a improv on Beethoven. Where was the inspiration for that taken from?
Well, it's one of my favorite works of Beethoven from one of my favorite symphonies, the Seventh Symphony. Such a well-known movement, so it's immediately recognizable, which is nice when you're going to sort of change things. It's nice for people to hear where you're going, starting from, and where you ended up with it. But the thing with Beethoven, for me, what is most meaningful and what I think connects me with his music, and for so many people, I think, is there's something very important about what he's writing about. He doesn't spend a lot of time writing about light, trivial, fun things, although he does at times. But so much of his work is kind of heavy and serious, and I think for me the musical origin of that, the way I kind of analyze it as a musician, is that he really understands the power of the pulse, the beat. This is something as a sort of recovering classical musician, I have spent a lot of my career focusing on, is playing rhythm. I sort of do this whole kind of bridge between classical string playing and contemporary popular music, rock and jazz and hip hop. And a lot of this is focused on the idea of grooving on my instrument, playing a beat, playing a pulse. And Beethoven, Beethoven got that. That's why I think a lot of rockers really kind of connect with Beethoven, because it's that beat that's so permanent sounding,
Don't you think Beethoven would dig rock music?
I'm sure of it. He would probably have been in a rock band if he were around today. I like to try to think, what would these classical composers do if they were alive today? Like Tchaikovsky, would he have written that great violin concerto, or would he have written an electric guitar concerto? It's hard to know, because we're living in a different time and place. And I think it's very important when we're dealing with the classical music, which has such a strong association with European, essentially white culture. It's really, I think, important for us as contemporary Americans to put this into our world. Our world is different. It's a different time. It's a different place. It's a different culture, different demographic. And I believe that our string music, as well as, Beethoven and all classical music, needs to somehow be viewed through our contemporary eyes.
I think we forget that, Beethoven really was, in many respects, the rock and roll of his day. His music, came out of, not just the musical tradition that he inherited, but also what he brought and what the world around him brought. Tracy, I want to ask you about your instrument.
Yeah.
The electric violin. And this is not just a sort of a regular electric violin, it's a 6-string violin.
It is. Here, I've got it sitting right here.
Right.
It is, yes, 6 strings. And
That's wonderful.
It's custom made by a luthier here in Nashville, Tennessee, named Joe Glazer. But it's an instrument that I designed myself. I've been designing them since I started playing them in the 80s. And I was one of the first people to play a 6-string violin. And, you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, first of all, for some of our viewers who may not be aware, the old-fashioned kind of violins, I've got one of those around here somewhere, have 4 strings. So this has 2 extra lower strings. It's got a viola C string, and then it's got a low F string, which it's not plugged in right now, but which goes down to the cello range. But what's really significant about having all of that in one instrument for me is not so much that I can just, cop the cello lines, but it becomes an essentially very different instrument. It becomes a chordal instrument, like a guitar, or it's closest to the guitar, but like a piano in pop music or a guitar. This is an instrument that can function as a chordal instrument, play rhythm, and accompany people just like a guitar now, which violins could not really do because we just didn't have the bass notes that you need to play chords for people. So that's been a big part of my journey. My life has been figuring out how to turn strings into more of a rhythm instrument and bring it back to which is a way, a route back to our vernacular roots, which is playing popular music, which is exactly what strings have been doing until the 20th century, in Beethoven's day and Mozart's day. So I'm trying to bring strings back into that and do what we originally did, which was to play the popular music of our day.
Especially since you can do looping and other kind of really cool techniques. Yeah. You're a one-man band in a lot of ways.
You can put distortion on it. You can put delays, effects, all of these tools that are available to contemporary musicians.
And you have the chops of a classically trained violinist.
Not so you'd notice, but yes. It took me years to forget everything that they taught me at Juilliard.
Tracy, when you started to play the instrument, you were playing on a regular 4-string violin.
I was.
How did you come to the electrified instrument?
Well, it was really pretty simple. I wanted to sound like a guitar. I wanted to play guitar. I wanted to play electric guitar. I wanted to be Jimi Hendrix,
Don't we all?
Yeah, right? But the truth is, luckily, I'm not a very good guitar player. And, in the guitar world, I'm one of, 5 million mediocre guitar players. But in the string world, I was like, hey, I'm a Juilliard graduate. I can kind of play Paganini and stuff. What if I tried this on the violin? And what the reason for that was the reason I wanted to play guitar is because that's what all my friends in school listened to. That's what my generation grew up listening to. We were raised on rock and roll. I was raised in the 70s and 80s and stuff. So I wanted to play music my friends would like. And so I started building these 6-string violins that would go as low as a guitar. I started playing them through these big Marshall amps and cranking and playing rock and roll. And not only did my friends like it, but when they would see when I would play for audiences, when kids would see this violin and then hear what it sounded like, the cognitive dissonance was just like, was wonderful. They would look like we'd walk out on the stage. We were in the old days, we were like opening for metal bands and stuff, and so they'd have this packed audience of fans that are waiting to see Jackal or something like that. And we would get out there and they'd see me with a violin and they'd immediately start like booing and like, yeah, we'd hear all this stuff. And then I'd just like crank the distortion up through the Marshall and their eyes would just open up and it's like, oh shit, and they would just be like, rock and roll. So, so that was, it was easy. It was kind of like easy to do, because all you had to do is put distortion on it and blow people's minds. But,
That's pretty cool.
But anyway, that was kind of where I was going. That's what started me on this path.
Well, Tracy, you mentioned Jimi Hendrix, and I know, Kimo, that Jimi Hendrix was very instrumental in your coming to music, wasn't he?
That's correct. 1969, I'll never forget it. I went to a concert in Waikiki to see Hendrix. I had already heard Purple Haze, which changed my life. Just the first two notes, diminished fifth, and I said, what is that? And he did it with such ease, and he just kind of turned the world upside down with that. And so he turned my world upside down. I just graduated college, went to my first concert really, because I was into sports, and so I didn't go to concerts and things like that, but I wanted to go to that one, and I went to it, sat down. He entered the stage, just him and two other musicians, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell. And he was tuning up, and it was the greatest sound I ever heard, just tuning up. It was just, I just sat there on the grass. And so I sat there for that whole night and heard, because I never believed that what was happening on the record was actually able to be done with three people. And then he did it. I mean, it was the greatest sound. And so from that point on, it was not so much about the greatness or the technical ability of him as a musician. It was that he was communicate. I could see the people around me that he was able to communicate something that I've never heard music do before. And I said, I want to take hold of that language and see what I can do with it.
1969 was an important year for you as well in terms of your life, because that's when you went to Vietnam.
That's correct, yes. Well, 1969 was when I joined the Army. Then I went to all of the training that you needed to do, but I landed in Vietnam on my birthday, in fact. In fact, I joined the Army on July 4th. Isn't it amazing?
Wow.
Really? Yeah, and then I landed in Vietnam on my birthday, January the 8th, 1970. Vietnam and Hendrix both changed all aspects of who I am, what I do, my value structure, and my approach to music.
When you came back from Vietnam, you went to Berkeley.
Right.
To the Berkeley School of Music. What impact has your experiences in Vietnam, what impact have they had on you as a musician, as a composer?
As it relates to Vietnam, one of the things that a lot of the Vietnam veterans were dealing with in Vietnam was downtime, which means what were we going to do today? In a lot of cases, you didn't know what was going to happen the following day. But I wanted to find things to do, and one of the things was music. And so I remember the Hendrix concert. We were able to buy everything there so cheaply, so I bought my first guitar in Vietnam for $35 that was made in the woods somewhere. And I started just kind of remembering what I had heard just before I left, and I tried to play Purple Haze, and I got a little bit better, and then I put a band together. It was the worst. If you ever want to really hear the worst rendition of Purple Haze in your life, it will be when I played it in Vietnam in front of the troops. I will tell you this, though, they loved it.
I'm sure they did.
Because, they were getting this music and they were getting this taste of home. And I would say Jimi Hendrix, and they would go nuts. I played badly, but I was in heaven playing that guitar, and I would write new tunes. Then I had a little cassette tape recorder, and I would record these different ideas and tunes that I had. And so that was my connection of how I got to doing a lot of music in Vietnam. I played for the troops. I created new melodies, and I used a GI Bill and went to Berklee College of Music. And then I used those things that I learned or that I created in Vietnam and applied it to the things I was learning at Berklee.
Well, we're going to hear your commission in just a moment, but I should say that at the end of this program, I invite everybody to stay tuned for the Q&A session that we'll have with Tracy and with Kimo. Before that, though, we're going to hear some actual Beethoven. Matt, set up this string quartet, which I believe is Opus 18, number 6. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the idea to perform this piece and curate it as part of this program really came from Kimo because he used a quote from this particular string quartet in his new commission. And we'll talk a little bit more about that more specifically later.
Give us a sense of what this music is like.
Sure, Sinjin. So we're going to hear first the unadulterated version of Beethoven. So this is his string quartet number 6, Opus 18. Like you said, it is in the key of B flat major. And it's, really what you think of when you think of like a really classical style and form string quartet. So the first movement is in sonata form, which is a type of composition that has 3 sections. We have a theme. In this case, it's presented by the first violin and the cello. And then we move on to development. And then in the recapitulation, we come back to the first theme. So you'll be able to easily distinguish those 3 sections in this quartet. Then we'll move on to the second movement, which is the slow movement. It's very lyrical, nostalgic, but also kind of happy and hopeful melody. But it is also interjected by the cello and the viola with these strange accented notes that Beethoven takes the time. Yeah, he takes the time to actually mark them as queste note ben marcate. So these notes well marked, and so you kind of hear a difference of things there. And then I'll pass it up to Matthew here so he can talk about the other movement.
So the next movement I think is really interesting. It's a scherzo movement, which is fast and lively. And I think here you'll hear a lot of what Tracy was alluding to in terms of the pulse, sort of that elemental thing that Beethoven does so well. And he plays with it here because you hear this contrast of 6/8 rhythms and 3/4 rhythms. Depending upon how you group the beats, you hear both of those things sort of juxtaposed. And the final movement, I think, is really unexpected. And this is where, Beethoven was sort of pushing the boundaries because he starts with this incredibly slow, it's called the Melancholia, incredibly slow introduction to the last movement, which is really the emotional heart of this string quartet, I'd say. And this, if I'm not mistaken, Kimo, is where you actually embed a little direct quote from the Beethoven string quartet.
That's correct, yes. In the cello part,
in the cello part. And it's sort of buried in, with some double stops and some other droning notes, but it's this beautiful moment in Kimo's work that quotes directly from the Melancholia. And you know what I love also is just that this time that we're all living through has so much of these sort of low emotions, but what Beethoven gives us after the Melancholia is this light-hearted, uplifting, and I think we can all feel Beethoven sort of sending us a message that, after the low times, there's hope for a bright future.
Well, let's hear the Apollo Chamber Players perform this Beethoven String Quartet, Opus 18, number 6, the quartet in B-flat major. Here is the Apollo Chamber Players. We heard the Apollo Chamber Players there with the Beethoven String Quartet in B-flat major, Opus 18, number 6, in remembrance or celebration, I should say, of the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. We're also marking this time with a brand new composition that commissioned by the Apollo Chamber Players from Kimo Williams. And this is titled With Malice Toward None. Talk about this piece and how it all came about.
I remember I contacted Kimo and I asked him to write a piece for Apollo, somehow inspired by Beethoven. Kimo came back to me with this really bold and meaningful idea to connect Beethoven's wish for his music to be a force for good for humanity and tie that in with our current moment. We always wanted some kind of rock element to be a part of this too, hence the addition of Tracy Silverman.
You talk about the times that we're living through with the COVID-19 and all the social justice movements. And Kimo, you dedicate this piece to the late, great John Lewis. Talk about him and the impact that his death has had on you and how you are approaching this time and your work at this time.
When Matt contacted me and we talked about Beethoven, and then I also realized where I was right now in the pandemic and what was going on politically in the country, as well as with Black Lives Matter. I wanted to find a way to find that inspiration to write something that could connect all of those things together. And I did my initial research on Beethoven and found some very, very interesting things about his motivation for writing. And so I thought that I would kind of take that as the foundation of the piece that I was going to write is, well, what was he trying to say through his music? What was it like? Because as you know, during that time was a time of enlightenment. It was the French Revolution, and Beethoven was a part of trying to say we need to do the right thing for humanity in general. He was when he was in Vienna, of course, it was extremely conservative. Everything was about the dance. It was all commercial. It was like, let's enjoy music and let's just have a good time. And then they go home and they forget about it. And Beethoven said that ain't going to happen anymore. And he started to write music, and he wrote music for them to be moved by, for them to learn, to provide a communication vehicle of what it is that he thought and where he thought things should go and how things should be. So I got from that he was able to use music to do that, that perhaps through this composition, I could do the same thing. So I looked around. I reevaluated where we were as a country. And one of the things I did was I found an older picture that I took in 1980 in Washington, D.C. of the Lincoln Memorial. And I didn't realize it until about 2 or 3 months ago that the shot that I took that I thought I was just taking of the memorial actually had a dark-skinned worker sweeping the steps at the same time. And I guess at that moment in that time, being the pandemic, being where we were, and I looked at that and it just really hit me. I didn't even know what to call it. I just knew that there was something there that spoke to how we have to be better citizens in this universe. So of course I talked with my wife, and then we both, Carol, we both started to converse about things. And I realized it was the Lincoln Memorial, so I did some history, additional history on Lincoln, and I read his second inaugural address. And that address also spoke to the same types of things that Beethoven was speaking to. And that was that we as humans should learn to find ways to deal with each other, regardless of what it is that we're debating. And of course, after the Civil War, Lincoln's second inaugural at the last paragraph was speaking directly to that. It was speaking to that, yes, the South did this and the South did that, but let's have no malice towards them. And let's move this country forward to be one. And so that was the connection of with the title being With Malice Toward None. And then to really understand that at this time, John Lewis has been at the forefront of trying to create those kinds of understandings among people. How I laid the string quartet out was very important to me, was to try to connect the three movements of Beethoven as a composer. They have his period one, and I'm calling each section within the string quartet period 1, period 2, and period 3. And through these periods, I'm trying to create an actual, what I thought of, let me put it this way, what I thought about was equilibrium, where everybody is sort of together. This is period 1, and looking at things around and dialoguing and conversing. Then we get into a period 2, and now there's more conflict. There's more people who are interacting with each other and they're not happy with directions. And this is sort of connected to where we are now in 2020 with regards to, it seems like it's more we, they than it's ever been. And then the last section is more about, in the very last 2 notes, and I indicated this in my program, is my is more inspired by John Lewis than anything else, because there's this back and forth and people are fighting the line, you know, da 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 da, and then they're back and forth back with each other. And then at the end, with these huge chords, it's to suggest protest, and it ends. So my point is that if things aren't where, and this is what America's always been about, if things aren't where you feel it should do, where it should be, you should have the ability to protest so that your voice is heard. And John Lewis was very clear about that, is that if you don't say anything, then nothing has been said. So anyway, that's how the 3 periods, or the 3 pieces, is connected to Beethoven. His 3 periods, his early stage, the middle, and the later. And so that's my segue into this piece as well.
Matt, this is a commission from Kimo. So you have commissioned him to write this work. How was this commission made possible?
This commission is generously supported and underwritten by some really great friends of Apollo Chamber players. Their names are Donald and Rhonda Sweeney. So we're very grateful for their support of Apollo Chamber players.
And I thank them also, yes.
Yeah.
And we also want to acknowledge Pamela Alburn and the Brown Foundation here in Houston as well. Through some of their support, we're able to provide all of our digital concerts in this season, our Pathways of Renewal season, free of charge, available to everybody. So we really are appreciative of their support.
Well, maybe it's time to hear this piece that we have been talking about, a piece that is inspired by 3 great men, Beethoven, Abraham Lincoln, and John Lewis. This is With Malice Toward None, featuring the Apollo Chamber players and electric violinist Tracy Silverman, a piece written by our featured composer, Kimo Williams. Enjoy. Don't forget to stay tuned for the Q&A with the Apollo Chamber players, Tracy Silverman and Kimo Williams, which you'll find on the Apollo Facebook page and YouTube. Kimo, Tracy, Matt, Annabelle, Matthew, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
everybody. Thanks for joining us.